Thanks for staying with NDTV. You're watching the Wednesday edition of the World Report, and I'm Arjun Samar Mahendran. Roughly 2 weeks since the US strikes on Iran's key nuclear facility, Tehran has officially suspended its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA. President Masoud Pezeshkian, in fact, has officially notified the cabinet of the enactment of the law suspending cooperation. Now, this comes after Iran's parliament, in fact, approved a bill on Wednesday to suspend cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog. The law, in fact, now stipulates that any further inspection by the IAEA would need approval by the country's Supreme National Security Council. And my colleague Mohammad Ghazali, in fact, joins us to unpack this. Ghazali, what's the latest you're picking up, and why has Iran taken this step? Is it just out of fear of confidential information reaching the West, or is there more at play here?
See, there are multiple reasons why Iran has upped the ante. One, because they have been accusing IAEA for spying or kind of favoring Israel and giving false report about their nuclear enrichment capacity, which led to the strikes by US and Israel just a couple of weeks ago. And that is why it still believes that IAEA is complicit or is working on behalf of Israel and is publishing some falsified reports accusing Iran of being able to develop nuclear bombs, while Iran claims that their entire nuclear program is a peaceful program. It has nothing to do with developing a bomb. Besides that, why Iran is doing it, there is also a reason behind it, that Iran also believes that perhaps this kind of pressure tactics will work with US, where Donald Trump was earlier planning to lift the sanctions on Iran and also release all the frozen funds in the West for Iran. But Donald Trump said that he changed his minds after Ayatollah Khamenei's comments criticizing Israel and US for attacking on its nuclear enrichment centers. So Iran, some way or the other, is playing the hard bargain game by upping the ante against IAEA. And because due to this law, now the IAEA inspectors can't get inside Iran to visit those enrichment centers or to even kind of determine that what is the status of the nuclear enrichment program of Iran. So that also gives them a leeway to create an official suspense over whether or what kind of damage those strikes did to Iran's capability to develop nuclear bomb.
Well, thank you so much for getting us the latest, Ghazali. Now, moving focus in a clear message to China, the Dalai Lama has said the institution of the Dalai Lama will in fact continue, and the Gadon Phodrang Trust has the sole authority to recognize the future of reincarnation, ending years of waiting by followers of the Tibetan Buddhist spiritual leader, in fact, for details about his succession. Now, the exiled spiritual leader of Tibet confirmed today that he will have a successor when he dies, reassuring Buddhist followers around the globe that the 600-year-old institution of the Dalai Lama will continue. It is a landmark decision, viewers, for Tibetans, many of whom had feared a future without a leader, as well as for global supporters who see the Dalai Lama as a symbol of non-violence, compassion, and the enduring struggle for Tibetan cultural identity under the dragon's rule. First, let's listen in to what the Dalai Lama actually said, followed by my colleague Gauri Dwivedi breaking it down for you.
공장 상도 선거 추규 라전카다 배미서 배미천 제유탄대 망조로 고들기 겨우군지 균투 귀미 결시 타수 최사인 시사와더 벌거 디네 탄대 망조로 믹세 고들 저규 머소로 대베 롱을 주시인 추규하게 우치 라전나보다 배미 지수기 투수당 믹스 소재 전교당 성진 멤버 소바카 히말라야 리기 전부 홀다 루스 공기 남베 유근
Two very important points as far as the statement that was issued by His Holiness today. It was expected that on his 90th birthday he would announce a successor, or he could even announce whether or not the tradition to have the Dalai Lama should continue or not. Now remember, the Dalai Lama is the spiritual head, the fountainhead of the Tibetan Buddhism thought process, and he's essentially Bodhisattva, as he's called, one full of compassion, spiritual journey, so to say, and the leader for the entire community. Now, there was an expectation that a successor would be announced. While a successor hasn't been announced today, His Holiness has very clearly pointed out that the tradition to have the spiritual leader, the tradition to have the Dalai Lama will continue. And that's a very strong message that's being given out to the diaspora, the Tibetan diaspora the world over. In India as well, we host very large number of Tibetans in the entire Himalayan belt as well. We also host the Tibetan government in exile here, and also a very strong message to China, which has been trying to host its own successor after His Holiness. So this is a very important announcement that came today. Though a successor is yet to be identified, a search will take place, but the fact that there will be one is very important, because this spiritual leader is also a rallying point for all the Tibetans the world over. And I think that is the single biggest message that's being sent out. Now, whether China is going to come out with its own successor or not, dispute what His Holiness's legacy is going to be, is something that we're going to get to know in coming days. But it's important to highlight that the tradition will continue in the strongest possible message to Tibetans, to Chinese, and to the world at large.
A day after US President Donald Trump threatened to deport New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, he has hit back as the US president, saying he refused to be intimidated after Trump said his administration would in fact have the Democrat arrested if he stops immigration and customs enforcement or ICE officials from doing their work in America's most populous city. Now, the Democrat also attacked Trump for praising New York's current mayor, Eric Adams, in his authoritarian threats. Mamdani maintains Trump's praises for Adams, who was elected in 2021 as a Democrat but is running as an independent, are unsurprising, but highlights the urgency of bringing an end to the mayor's time in City Hall. And what happens when America's richest tech mogul goes to war with America's most controversial president? Well, Elon Musk versus Donald Trump is no longer just a whisper fight. It's a full-blown political explosion. And my colleague Parmeshwar Bava, in fact, breaks down why Trump is targeting Musk, the $4 trillion bill that started it all, as well as Musk's plan to start the America Party.
In the land of rockets, electric cars, and raging egos, America's biggest billionaire and its most controversial president have just intensified their feud. It's Donald Trump versus Elon Musk yet again. And no, this isn't Twitter beef. It's no Truth Social beef either. This is deportation-level drama. Trump has now said he would take a look at deporting Elon Musk, the same Elon who once had a desk in Trump's own administration. So what happened to their bromance? Well, let's just rewind. Trump is furious over Musk trashing his beloved $4 trillion spending plan. You know, the one Trump called the one big beautiful bill. Musk calls it a disgusting abomination. He says it explodes US debt, helps no one, and turns Washington into what he called the Porky Pig Party. But Elon didn't stop there. He threatened to launch a third political party named the America Party, vowed to purge lawmakers who voted for the bill, and said the US is basically a one-party country. That's when Trump hit back, saying Musk only got rich thanks to government subsidies. To quote him, the US president said, Musk may have to close up shop and go back to South Africa. And then the ultimate Trumpism. He said, maybe we let Doge take a look at him. Yes, Doge, not the meme coin, but the Department of Government Efficiency, which Musk used to actually head under Trump. So now we have a president hinting at deporting America's most high-profile CEO, a billionaire threatening to overthrow Washington's two-party system, and Steve Bannon calling Musk an illegal immigrant, while some lawmakers are literally tweeting, send ICE after him. Musk, of course, denies any illegal immigration, saying he came on a J-1 visa, then an H-1B, and became a citizen in 2002, all documented. So what is this really? A spending fight, a broken bromance, or a billionaire lighting matches in the halls of power? Well, one thing's for sure, this isn't just another Trump tantrum or Musk meltdown. This could be the start of a third-party threat in American politics, or at least another headline Musk controls. But it's fair to say that from the Oval Office to the launch pad, this is no longer just about money and rockets. It's about power, it's about pride and political revenge. And the world is watching every post, every punch, and of course, every plot twist.
US President Donald Trump urged Iran-backed Hamas militants on Tuesday to agree to what he calls a final proposal for a 60-day ceasefire with Israel in Gaza that, in fact, will be delivered by mediating officials from Qatar and Egypt. In a social media post, Trump said his representatives had a long and productive meeting with Israeli officials about Gaza. He, however, did not identify his representatives, but U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and even Vice President J.D. Vance had been due to meet Ron Dremer, a senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump said Israel has agreed to the condition to finalize a 60-day truce, during which time we will work with all parties to end the war, he said. He also added that representatives for Qatar and Egypt will deliver this final proposal to Hamas. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has threatened to impose a 30% or 35% tariff on Japan if a deal between the two countries is not reached before a deadline next week. Well above the 24% tariff Japan was hit with as part of Trump's liberal day on the 2nd of April, when he announced steep import duties on countries around the world. Now, Trump also continued to cast doubt or aspersions that an agreement could be reached with Tokyo. On Tuesday, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi said he would not make concessions that could hurt his country's farmers to strike an agreement with Washington. Meanwhile, Tokyo stocks opened lower Wednesday due to the growing concern over the US-Japan tariff negotiations after Trump indicated that the idea of further increasing levies on imports from Japan was real. Meanwhile, Tokyo stocks opened lower. This is because of Trump's idea that a deal could not be reached. Meanwhile, here's a report.
No, I'm not. I'm not thinking about the pause. I'll be writing letters to a lot of countries, and I think you're just starting to understand the process. We've dealt with Japan. I'm not sure if we're going to make a deal. I doubt it with Japan. They're very tough. You have to understand they're very spoiled.
US President Donald Trump on Tuesday reaffirmed that India-US will soon strike a trade deal with much less tariffs, he says, allowing both countries to compete. Now, India and the US have been negotiating over a bilateral trade agreement, or a BTA as they are called, viewers, before the critical July 9 deadline of the 90-day pause on tariff escalations. Meanwhile, New Delhi has adopted a firmer stance on agricultural matters as high-stakes trade negotiations with Washington reach a pivotal moment. Government sources have informed on Monday. Meanwhile, NDTV Profits Rishabh Bhatnagar brings the details.
If we're going to have a deal with India, possibly, and that's going to be a different kind of a deal. It's going to be a deal where we're able to go in and compete. Right now, India doesn't accept anybody in. I think India is going to do that, and if they do that, we're going to have a deal for much less tariffs.
What Donald Trump has said, and he's repeatedly been extremely positive about the sentiment around this U.S.-India trade deal before July 9 as well. Not just the entire trade deal, but the interim trade deal that is being negotiated before July 9. Sort of opposing commentary coming in from the U.S. It's always been very positive in terms of what sort of on whether a deal could be reached. But from the Indian side, there seems to be a stalemate that has been reached because Indian negotiators are refusing to budge on key U.S. demands like access to agricultural sector and India's dairy sector, both of which are extremely sensitive. They tend to be very politically sensitive as well, given the fact that we are a very, very large agrarian economy, and a lot of small and medium farmers depend on those sectors for livelihood. So, for example, if American dairy enters India, they might be able to undercut the current prices that a lot of Indian farmers have set and the Indian government has set via its MSP program. So that is the number one sticking point. The other sticking point is that India wants further reassurance that there will be no additional duties once a deal is reached after after the first interim trade deal is reached under the bilateral trade agreement. That is the first, and that is another major point that there has to be as part of this interim trade deal.
Now we shift focus eastwards, where a day after Russia launched a massive assault on Ukraine, Kiev has in turn launched its deepest drone strikes into Russia, killing at least 3. Now reports say attack targeted a drone manufacturer in Ishkiv province. It's 1,000 kilometers from the front line. Meanwhile, Russian President Putin has held a substantial phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron. It's the first in almost 3 years. For perspective, the French leader called for a ceasefire in Ukraine and the start of negotiations on ending the conflict, while the Kremlin said that Putin reminded Macron that the Ukrainian conflict is a direct consequence of the policy of Western states. With the region, the U.S. has halted some weapon shipments to Kiev, the White House has revealed. Now, this comes as Russia's war against Ukraine has intensified in the past couple of weeks. The White House has stated that the decision was taken, in fact, to put America's interests first, following a Department of Defense review of U.S. military support and assistance to other countries. That's what the official statement says. Now, the decision to halt some weapon transfers to Ukraine comes after President Volodymyr Zelensky pleaded with Western allies to, in fact, bolster its aerial defenses after intensifying Russian airborne attacks. Over in Washington at the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting, India, the US, Japan and Australia have together unequivocally condemned the April 22nd Pahalgam terror attack, vowing stringent action against state-backed terrorism. That's correct. EM Jaishankar emphasized a zero-tolerance policy for terrorism, asserting India's right to defend itself and urging the Quad partners to support this stance. Listen into what he said. Here's the report.
Quad is about deepening our convergence and expanding our common ground. I value our consultations on different dimensions of the Indo-Pacific in that regard. A lot is happening in the world, and I'm sure that our exchange of views will be very valuable for all of us. A word about terrorism in the light of our recent experience. The world must display zero tolerance. Victims and perpetrators must never be equated, and India has every right to defend its people against terrorism, and we will exercise that right. We expect our Quad partners to understand and appreciate that.
Well, yes, terrorism is something that India talks about often. This is not the first time. The External Affairs Minister was at the United Nations just a day before yesterday in New York, also highlighting terrorism. So on broad terms, certainly the Quad has made noises supporting the overall stance of fighting against terrorism and standing up to it. But that doesn't seem to be the full focus of Quad during this meeting, which happened in DC. But I do want to underline that there are other challenges that the Quad is facing. Each of those countries, Japan, Australia, India, along with the United States, even though there was so much emphasis on Quad cooperation by the United States, especially at the beginning of the year in January, there have been some shadows after that because the tariffs which Donald Trump has imposed have affected all of these countries. So there is some amount of bristling and friction there within the Quad, including Japan, which has been asked to increase its defense spending by the United States, and they're not so happy about doing that. So while overall front of cooperation as counterweight to China is important to Quad and remains in place, there are still a lot of mini fractures which have not been fully addressed.
An unnerving incident from the land down under. Viewers, in a shocking incident, an Australian domestic flight was delayed for 2 hours after a snake was found in the plane's cargo hold, as you see there on your screens right now. Now, the snake was found as passengers were boarding the Virgin Australia flight number VA337 at the Melbourne-bound airport for Brisbane. Fortunately, the snake turned out to be a harmless 60-centimeter green tree snake. However, for quarantine reasons, the snake cannot be returned to the wild. Well, it's time we slip into a short break. Much more on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching the World Report. Now, news from the world of business, where CBS parent company Paramount on Wednesday settled a lawsuit filed by US President Donald Trump over an interview broadcast in October. Now, it's the latest concession by a media company to a president who has targeted outlets over what he describes as false or misleading coverage. Paramount said it would pay $16 million to settle the suit with the money allocated to Trump's future presidential library and not paid to Trump directly or indirectly. Del Monte Foods has kicked off efforts to pursue a sale as it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings in the US on Tuesday under an agreement with certain key lenders. Now, the company has said this in a statement. Now, Shubman Gill's team India prepared to take on England in the second test at Birmingham's Edgbaston. The spotlight is firmly on selection decisions, workload management, and of course, potential history makers. Trailing 1-0 in the 5-match series, in fact, after failing to defend 371 in Leeds, despite 5 centuries, including 2 by Rishabh Pant, India must now make bold tactical choices to stay alive in the series. This year's Wimbledon has featured a staggering wave of early exits from seeded players. On the men's side, 13 seeded players have fallen in the opening round itself, breaking the tournament record and tying the 2004 Australian Open for the most at a Grand Slam tournament. The previous Wimbledon record for most seeds to lose in the men's single first round was 11. Now, third seed Alexander Zverev was the highest seeded player to fall in the opening round. The German lost on Tuesday in 5 sets to heavy-hitting Frenchman Arthur Rydenkow, who did not drop serve for the entirety of the match to secure his biggest career win by the PIF ATF ranking. The jury in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial says it has reached a verdict on 4 out of 5 counts against the hip-hop mogul. The jury is in fact set to resume deliberations after reaching a yet-to-be-disclosed verdict on all but one of the 5 charges the hip-hop mogul faces. Now, the jury was stuck on the top charge, racketeering conspiracy. Prosecutors say Combs' defense team and Judge Arjun Subramaniam reasoned that after just 2 days of deliberations, it was too soon to give up on reaching a verdict on all the counts. So rather than taking a partial verdict, Subramaniam told the jury to continue weighing the remaining charge. Here's a report. Well, that's all we have for you on this Wednesday edition of the World Report. Take care and have a wonderful day.